Hey everyone, it's Shark, and I'm here to answer one of the most common questions I get, whether it's on Twitch, in Discord, or in the YouTube comments. And that question is, are you really a shark? Yes. Seriously though, there's one question I get all the time, and that question is, what team should I build? Unfortunately, there's not really a great answer to this, until now. Since everyone will have different characters on their accounts, and the starting characters don't really have great synergy as a whole team, you pretty much need a few extra characters to create a team that actually works together, rather than just being a random hodgepodge of whatever characters you had. That is, until the Dendro element came to the picture in this most recent update. Thankfully now we have a lot more options for teams thanks to our ability to get free Dendro characters. So I'm going to go over two teams that everyone can build as soon as they reach Sumeru that will be very strong. Now while these teams have a lot of room for improvement, the best part is that they're free and they don't require any wishing. I'll also show off what these teams can do in a few domain runs, and even though my teams that I've made are very poorly built with almost no artifacts, level 1 weapons, you can see that they still get the job done pretty well. So let's get started with our first team. Now this first team does great damage, but it does rely on free characters we get from recent events, so some people playing far in the future may not have these two characters from the start. Nevertheless, a lot of people will have them from past events, so here's a really good team and a really good way to put them to use. It also involves a character that doesn't get a lot of love, at least not a lot of love in the amount of people who play her. This team is Lisa, Fischl, Dendro Traveler, and Kale. The mechanics behind this team are pretty simple. You use Dendro and Electro to create Quicken, and then you use lots and lots of Electro to create Aggravate, buffing the damage of Electro. Fischl and Dendro main character are the key to this team, and Fischl does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to damage. And by Fischl, I actually mean Oz, because the little bird that she summons with both her elemental skill and elemental burst is what really drives this team home. Oz shoots these little electro birdseed pellets from his mouth that do a bit of electro damage, and they happen quite frequently. But things really get crazy when you ascend Fischl past level 60 and unlock her final passive talent. And this is the key to the entire team, because this passive talent allows Oz to deal another instance of electro damage anytime an electro reaction is created. And since Aggravate is an electro reaction, he can create a bunch of electro reactions back to back. What's also really nice about this is the cooldown is only half a second, so it can trigger very frequently. Another nice thing about Fischl is she's not a character who needs a specific artifact set. She really just wants the overall substats to be the best they can. The substats she looks for are crit rate, crit damage, attack percent, and elemental mastery. Basically all the offensive stats in the game. You already have access to a couple good bows for Fischl. You can use the Favonius Warbow, which you get for free, and that will help with your team energy. It's very nice. Or you can go to Sumeru and you can start fishing to get the new end of the line bow and have Fischl use a fish bow, which just somehow seems appropriate for her. And if I were a newer player building this team from scratch, I'd probably give Fischl the end of the line bow and then give Kale the Favonius Warbow. She can work well with any of the 2-piece attack percent artifact sets like Shiminawa or Gladiators, as well as 2-piece Thundering Fury. Even 4-piece Thunder Soother is pretty good for her. The new Gilded Dreams artifact set is also an option. Just remember, she's more concerned about having good substats overall than having a specific artifact set. So give her the best artifacts you can find, even if they're ones that are kind of mismatched. The reason for this is because Aggravate damage is affected by damage percent, crit rate, crit damage, and not just elemental mastery. And since this team focuses on Aggravate damage, you want to make sure to enhance that as much as possible. And because you need a lot of Dendro on the field to trigger these reactions and create the Aggravate reaction, that's why we have the Dendro Traveler. They can create a Dendro AoE off-field, and while their Dendro application isn't the best, it is the best we have right now, so that's why we use them. This is also the same reason we use Kale, because she can apply Dendro off-field with her elemental burst, but again, it's not the greatest. However, having Kale as a second Dendro character does give us access to Dendro Resonance, which is pretty helpful. And having a second character to generate Dendro particles is nice for the Dendro Traveler. Now you could run the new Dendro artifact set, the Deepwood Memories, on either Kale or the Dendro Traveler, but don't run them on both because the effects won't stack up. Instead, you could run one of them with a 4-piece Noblesse to give your team an extra 20% attack, or even the Exile set, which is a 4-star artifact set, and that will help you with energy regeneration for your whole team. So pick one of those artifact sets to run on the Dendro Traveler, and another one to run on Kale, and you're golden. Now Lisa's actually a pretty interesting pick here because you'll spending most of the time with her on the field doing auto attacks, which is typical of a main DPS, but Lisa's not really a main DPS in this team, she's more of the team driver. What that means is that she's useful for her auto attacks because her auto attacks pretty fast and they also apply a lot of electro. This helps continuously create the aggravate reaction by triggering Fischl's Ascension 4, aka Oz's Ascension 4 passive. Now one thing to note about Lisa is that the hold version of her skill is the only one which will generate electro particles, so that's pretty terrible because it takes forever to come out, and her elemental burst is actually quite nice. Her burst not only deals a lot of electro damage over time, but it also shreds 15% of enemy defense thanks to her Ascension 4 passive. So in this team, Lisa's actually very capable of dealing a lot of aggravate damage, but you're typically going to be using her as a driver and more for utility for the entire team. That's why if you plan to play Lisa in this team, you want to build her with lots of energy recharge and elemental mastery. And for the artifacts, the new Gilded Dream set is a really great set for her as it gives her a large amount of elemental mastery to deal more reaction damage. However, the 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate is also really good to use because it allows her to use her burst more often and deal more damage when doing it. But you can even use the 4-star Instructor set to boost your team's elemental mastery as well. And while this team is good, it is definitely not in its final form. If you have Yaimiko, Beidou, or Keqing, then you can easily replace Lisa for more damage. And if you have Xingqiu, you have a character who blocks some damage, does passive healing, applies a lot of Hydro, and does a lot of damage as well. In addition, his Hydro application allows you to go into a new type of reaction called Hyper Bloom, so he can be a great replacement for Kale. But if you don't have Xingqiu, you can also replace Kale with just about any Animo character, especially characters like Sucrose, Sayu, or Kazuha that do a lot of things off-field. And of course, Animo characters give you access to the power of Swirl. And overall, this team's pretty easy to play. Just remember you want enough Dendro application on the enemies while also a lot of Electro application so you can trigger Quicken and then Aggravate. So your rotation might go something like this. Dendro Traveler's skill and then burst, switch to Fischl, use her elemental skill to deal electro damage to the Lotus, charging it up, then switch to Kale to use her skill and burst, then switch to Lisa, use her burst, and then start auto-attacking with Lisa. There will be a bunch of electro hitting the enemies and they're going to be zapped into oblivion. I'm really glad we have access to a team like this because the team does synergize pretty well with each other, but there's plenty of room for upgrades too. The main core characters in this team are Fischl and the Dendro Traveler. You can easily replace Lisa and Kale with better characters. But at least now players have better options and hopefully they don't feel like they have to swipe in order to get better characters. And just to give you an idea about how effective this team is, the only character I have built in this team is my Fischl. Every other character is built pretty poorly. My Dendro Traveler skill and burst are level 6 and they have some Noblesse artifacts. My Kale has her talents at level 6, but she has no artifacts on her. And I don't think my Lisa has anything besides a Thrilling Tales on her. Also, Lisa and Kale are level 50 and 60 respectively, while Fischl and the Dendro Traveler are both level 80, and we're taking on a level 90 dungeon with pretty relative ease. So if you actually built this team well, you would be able to do this type of content way easier than I could. Now the drawback to this team is it does use a couple characters that we're getting for free from events. And since the event to get a free Fischl has already expired, and the event to get a free Kale will expire in a couple of weeks, we need another option. Luckily, there is another option for a good team that requires no wishing and uses only starting characters. Now this team is not as heavy in the damage department as the first team we talked about, but it does do very good on the control side of things. It also incorporates a healer, which the other team didn't have. It also has a lot of flexibility and revolves around 3 main characters, and again, it uses a character that is kind of a meme, and people don't use that often, but she's actually pretty effective here. And speaking of things that are great and free, don't forget to like this video. And while you're there, feel free to sub to the channel for more Genshin content delivered by a cute shark. And thank you so much, I really appreciate it. It does mean quite a lot to me. But back to this team using only free characters that shows off the power of vegetables. This team is Barbara, Kaya, the Dendro Traveler, and a Flex unit. This is what's been dubbed a Fridge team because it is a Bloom team that focuses on Hydro and Dendro to create Bloom seeds that explode for Dendro damage, as well as using a Cryo character to keep enemies frozen. This is also a really unique team because of the way that Dendro and Freeze interactions work together. Freeze is an interesting reaction because it is considered to have both Cryo and Hydro application at the same time coexisting together. Now when we add Dendro to the mix, something special happens because Dendro does not interact with Cryo, but it does interact with Hydro. The result is that we're able to get the Bloom reaction, which is Dendro plus Hydro, but the Freeze reaction, or the Cryo part of the Freeze reaction, does not affect the Dendro in any way. Or in Razor speak, plant plus water make Explodey seed. Plant plus ice do nothing. Therefore, ice no interrupt plant Explodey seeds. So now that we've got the basics out of the way, let's talk about how this team works. Very simply, you use the Dendro Traveler's skill and then burst, you switch to Barbara, use a couple things of Hydro, create a few blooms, and then you also affect the Dendro Traveler's elemental burst with Hydro. Then you switch to Kaya, use his Cryo, freeze all the enemies, then you switch back to Barbara, use her auto attacks, and generate more seeds. And after a few seconds, some seeds will explode, then you switch back to Kaya to freeze the enemies some more, and then you switch back to Barbara to freeze more enemies with the Hydro. Then switch back to the Dendro Traveler to apply some more Dendro, and rinse and repeat. This team actually feels pretty dynamic and a lot faster paced than I thought it was initially. Because you're switching between a lot of different characters to apply different elemental statuses, and characters like Kaya have a pretty short cooldown on their elemental skill, while the Dendro Traveler has not quite as short of a cooldown, but still a relatively short one. And because enemies are getting frozen and these Dendro seeds are popping up the field and exploding and new ones are coming up, it really feels like there's a whole lot going on. And because the frozen enemies can't move out of all the things you've set up, it feels very rewarding to play. Now you notice the last spot in this team is a flex spot. No, not that type of flex spot. It just means that this is a highly variable slot that you could put in a bunch of different characters. Really good choices for this flex slot would include characters like Xingqiu, Rosaria, Sucrose, Sayu, Venti, Kazuha, Kale, or a future Dendro character that does off-field Dendro application. And again, this team is nowhere near its final form. You could make a Super Saiyan turbocharged version of this team using Kokomi, Ayaka, Dendro MC, and Kazuha. But even if you use a really powerful team like that, the principle is still the same. Create a lot of blooms, freeze enemies, rinse and repeat. So let's go over how to build the characters for this team. Whatever Cryo character you bring, which in the free-to-play no-wish version would be Kaya, you want to make sure they're running a 4-piece Blizzard Strayer set. This will give them a massive 40% crit rate against frozen enemies. For your Dendro Traveler or other off-field Dendro applicator, you'll want to be running them on the Deepwood Memories artifact set. Blooms deal Dendro damage, so it's actually important to run this artifact set, especially considering the value of shredding 30% of Dendro resistance. Your Hydro character, which in this case is Barbara, can just run whatever set works well for them. For characters like Barbara or Kokomi, that could be the Ocean Hued Clam set. For characters like Xingqiu or Mona, that could be the Emblem of the Severed Fate set. And for characters like Ayato and Tartaglia, that could be the Heart of Depth set. You can also mix and match with 2 pieces of one set and 2 pieces of another set to best suit your needs. Now for the flex character slot, I would probably run something like Noblesse, Instructors, or Exiled for more team utility. Unless of course your flex character is an Animo character, in which case you want to run the Viridescent Venerer pretty much always. Now let me know what you think about these teams. Would you like a more in-depth build guide, maybe a more in-depth character guide, or a rotation guide on how to play these teams? Do you have other ones that you like running instead? And does this make you think differently about certain characters? I remember prior to Dendro's release with Sumru, I was really excited for the buff to Electro characters, particularly characters like Lisa and Kaching, which really needed a lot of love. And I have to say, I'm not disappointed with the results. Overall, I'm really excited for the possibility that Dendro brings, because right now we only have 3 Dendro characters, and they're not really that good for Dendro reactions, to be honest. And I'm really glad that the Dendro element introduced the ability for us to put together a comprehensive team that works well together and doesn't require any wishing. What's also really nice is that these teams don't require or really even want Bennett in a lot of situations, allowing us to free up a character like Bennett for, let's say, a second team for the Abyss. And overall, having a functional free-to-play team that requires no wishing, I think is very healthy for the game. And I'd like to see more of that in the future, as well as test out all the fun things that Dendro can do once we get a really good off-field Dendro applicator. But for now, I've been Shark, you've been awesome, and I will see you in the next one. Take care, friends, and continue to be amazing.